Hello H2 Workgroup members, my name is Rich Klusek and I am working on the Streetscape component of the Gateway District project. And so part of what we wanted to do today is give you some information so that you can begin thinking about what you want to see in the future. Now, nothing being said today is final, it's just an initial overview or a gut reaction, some of the things that we have been thinking. And so the purpose of this video, there are really three. First of all, we wanted to get you to start thinking about existing conditions and all the way that those existing conditions might affect what we do in the future. Second, we wanted to provide you with some videos of the corridor so that you can use them as a reference. In a separate video, actually, you'll see just a simple drive-through of each corridor. You'll be able to stop, fast forward, pause, so that you can study them and think about all the existing conditions that might affect our future plans. And third, we wanted to give you some things to think about as you start developing your visions for the future. We'll really get into that in the next series of videos where we'll start thinking about various streetscape elements that we might want to incorporate. So we're at step one right now, and this first video is all about thinking about the existing conditions. And as I said before, it's important because it helps us to shape what is reasonable for the future. There's no one-size-fits-all approach when we're thinking about the future streetscape plan for each corridor. So one key thing that we need to keep in mind when we're studying the existing conditions is that we have 5 unique corridors. We have East Market Street, North King Street, South King Street, West Market Street, and Edwards Ferry Road. They're all very, very unique. And with that uniqueness, we have 5 different characters. We're probably thinking about 5 unique streetscape concepts as well, thinking about the different number of lanes for each road and the different purpose that each of them might have. One key thing we have to be thinking about, though, is are there specific elements that might tie those corridors together? Perhaps they're common design elements or a common landscape pattern or something to that effect that we want to capitalize on. This is one example of one of the corridors that we're studying. This is East Market Street. I've driven this road many, many times, and it's not until you really start thinking about the details that you start seeing them and thinking about how they affect the streetscape and the overall experience that someone driving down the corridor might feel. We need to be thinking about a number of things like who uses the road, what are their speeds, how do buildings relate to the road. In this particular case, we really don't see many buildings relating to the road. We just see the back of Wegmans. We need to be thinking about what pedestrian facilities might exist on this road. In this particular case, we really don't see pedestrian facilities because East Market Street here serves as more of a highway. We need to be thinking about what decorative elements exist. Again, there really aren't that many decorative elements here. It is a highway. We do have the orange bollards because the road is under construction, but I don't anticipate that being something in our future streetscape. But the other key thing we need to be thinking about is how does the corridor say welcome to Leesburg? In this particular case, we do have this gateway sign over there, but it's really difficult to see. In comparison, when you're coming up from South King Street, I always feel that this sign is much easier to see. It's always that I always know I'm home when I approach that sign. So this is a character map that we developed, and it really is intended to just show you some of our first impressions of the various corridors. And we put together a lot of these categories that, I'll be honest, they kind of surprised me. I didn't expect to be using these categories until we actually started developing the map and studying the roads. So you see, for example, in the purple, rural highway. The reason that that's mapped the way it is because when you drive this corridor, when you come in on North King Street, for example, coming down from Route 15, you really don't see much to distinguish North King Street from Route 15 north of town. There's not much in the way of curb and gutter, or you don't see a lot of development. It really just feels like a little bit more of a rural section of road. A couple of the other corridors that we mapped, East Market Street, that's just a highway, that's shown in green. The area in blue we call the Suburban Collector. There's not really a whole lot going on that stretch of Edwards Ferry Road or South King Street to really define it. There's a lot of mismatched or mixed elements such as different lane widths, different building positions, different types of sidewalks and pedestrian features. The area in yellow I called small town residential. There's this very clear feeling you get once you approach that stretch of West Market Street coming in from the west. I also put that same color on Edwards Ferry Road because once you pass by the Walmart and you pass by the apartments, you get to this, pretty distinct small town residential feel. Before you do on Edwards Ferry Road, there's the orange color, and that color really represents some of the more multifamily buildings that you see, like the apartments, and so we call that suburban residential. So let's talk about each of these corridors individually. You're going to see a pretty quick drive-through with some individual comments from me. And again, I want to remind you that at the end of this video, or in a separate video actually, you'll see just the drive-throughs of each corridor, and you can start studying it on your own that way. So let's talk about a few of the roads in particular. This is East Market Street coming into town, just as you're crossing under River Creek Parkway here. And this is all sped up. I wasn't really driving this fast, but when you come into town, you just cross the border, nothing really changes from what you saw before. There's not a whole lot of things to really identify this corridor or to give it a particular character of any kind. You do see a median there with some natural plantings, see the guardrails. Again, noting that there's a median there, so there's some potential opportunity. Of course, as you're approaching the Battlefield Parkway intersection, we have to think about some significant changes we'll be making because we have an interchange going in. So basically you will be seeing the interchange here in the future, so that'll have a major effect on the streetscape. Here you'll be dealing with flyovers. By right about this point, the interchange, you should have passed the interchange in the future. Note the guardrails. We'll be seeing some changes here in the future with Cardinal Park Drive going away, or the intersection here at least. And at this point, we're basically approaching the end of this particular corridor. This one ends, generally speaking, once you cross over the ramp here. So this one here is West Market Street. When you first approach the corridor, there really isn't a whole lot going on for this small stretch. This corridor in general is pretty short, but it's once you cross over the first intersection, it suddenly changes pretty quickly and you feel like you've arrived into a small town. Note that there are sidewalks on one side but not on the other, no curb and gutter or anything of that sort. You also see the brick sidewalk. That's something that I tend to notice. Like I said, this corridor is very short, and at this point it's basically the end of the corridor already. The next one here is North King Street. The thing that strikes me about this one is that when you first enter into the town, you don't notice any real significant changes from what you saw north of town. It has what I would call a pretty rural feel. You don't see a whole lot of development, you don't see sidewalks, you don't see any real streetscape elements. Even when you pass these intersections here for the schools, you don't really see a whole lot of defining features. Again, want to point out, no curb and gutter, just what I would consider to be a fairly rural section of road. As you cross over by the school here, you see that there is a sidewalk, you see a little bit of development. Notice the gateway sign over there. Even here, as you approach Exeter, I just don't feel that there's a whole lot of development that you see from the road, and that's one of the reasons I consider it to have a rural character. As you cross by Ida Lee, you see a lot of open space. You do see one or two houses, but on the right side, it's a lot of open space. I noticed the fence there. Here, things begin to change just a little bit, and this is the point where the corridor ends. But as you cross over into the Oldham Historic District, things change very dramatically. On South King Street, as you're coming up north through town, again, I always notice that sign. There's a 4-lane road here. I see a pretty large median. I think there's some potential there, but there's not a whole lot going on either side of the road. You don't see much in the way of buildings, except in the background there you see some of the new houses associated with Meadowbrook. I note the fence on the west side of the road there. I think that's an element that defines some character. Here you see on the right side a lot of the new landscaping that was put in by the Meadowbrook project. I see that fence again on the left side. That median had a lot of unique trees. This is probably one of the longer corridors that we're actually studying, but one of the things I'm noticing is that it actually changes quite a bit as you go from one stretch of road to the next, depending on who the developer was and when things were developed. I know that median again. There's clearly no sidewalk or no pedestrian facilities on the east side of the road, but you do have pedestrian facilities behind a fence there on the west side. At this point, you're crossing into town underneath the bypass, and here is where I feel like things change pretty dramatically. All of a sudden it has a very suburban feel to it. The buildings are much closer to the road now. Again, and generally you just see those buildings, you begin to see the pedestrian facilities, but there's not a whole lot to tie it together from a design perspective. It's a lot of different things here and there, not necessarily one unifying element. And lastly, Edwards Ferry Road, actually starting in the county here, coming westbound into the town. The town boundary obviously falls at the Battlefield Parkway interchange here, and you see that there's the sidewalks, there's Edwards Landing, there's a 4-lane road. There's not a whole lot here, but then all of a sudden things do change pretty dramatically. Once you cross this point, you start to see the area associated with Costco and the Battlefield Shopping Center there with Dick's Sporting Goods. In general, it just feels like it's got that suburban commercial feel. The road is really defined by the parking areas on either side of the road. You do see some sidewalks and landscaping, which do contribute a bit, but it really changes pretty quickly a couple of times here. Obviously there's a change again here where you do see a little bit more of that more dense landscaping and vegetation. At some point in the future we could expect major changes here with the interchange that's anticipated to come in, but the character right now is generally consistent. It's got that suburban commercial feel still, even as you cross by the old Walmart. And at this point things begin to change a little bit. You see the new townhouses on the left side of the road here. It's got a little bit more of what I'm calling a suburban residential feel, where you see more of the multifamily buildings, but you do still see a lot of the parking areas. I'm noting the median here, the fences on the right side of the road. And it's at this point, right about here, that things change pretty quickly, and it goes back to what I'm calling the small town residential feel. All of a sudden the road gets narrower, you see the single family homes, you see the sidewalk, you just get to a much more condensed scale is the best way I could describe it at this point. And this kind of continues up until the end of the corridor, noting there's sidewalk only on one side, but you still do see the houses. Okay, so I hope that was helpful. But we don't want you to rely on the things that I'm saying. We want you to go out and do your own assessment or study them via the videos and tell us what you think about current conditions and what you would like to see improved. So at this point, we're asking a number of questions so that you can tell us what you think about each corridor. Questions like, do you like the corridor or do you want to change it? Are there elements you want to preserve? Does the corridor serve the gateway function well? And if not, what needs to change? You can provide a few words to describe the character of the corridor and perhaps other noteworthy observations that you might have. So this is actually your first assignment, and you don't necessarily have to do it, but we did provide with the email that this video is being sent in an attachment just so that you can provide some initial thoughts or reactions to these questions. We do think that it would be helpful to understand your thoughts as we move forward and develop the streetscape plan in the future. And so if you do have any additional suggestions, we are asking that you provide your responses by May 15th. Next week, we'll be providing you with video number 2. And that video is all about identifying the desired character. We're moving from existing to desired. And we're also going to be looking at some of the different streetscape elements that we need to be thinking about as we move forward. Things like street furniture, landscape features, etc. We also want to use the second video to really think a little bit more about what is the goal of the streetscape plan. What are we trying to accommodate more than anything? Is it improved pedestrian accessibility? Is it improved aesthetics? A lot more questions along those lines. And we'll be doing that by using a SurveyMonkey. And as I mentioned before, one of the key things we want to get at is what is the goal and vision for each corridor. We'll be asking you to rank a number of thoughts and ideas. And we also want to find out what streetscape elements you see as being most important. So if you do have ideas or things that you want feedback on from the rest of the H2 work group and things that you want us to incorporate into that SurveyMonkey, you can go ahead and send us questions. We'll go ahead and we'll incorporate them. And this is going to be your second assignment. We'll talk a little bit more about this in the second video, so you can provide your responses to that after the second video. For the week of May 18th, we'll be looking at a third video. And in that video, we'll be talking about how your vision, how the ideas that you had in that SurveyMonkey get translated into an actual streetscape plan. So we'll be talking about various types of text and images that help us get to articulating your goals and ideas. So in summary for today, we're looking for you to provide your thoughts on the existing character by May 15th. We want you to start thinking about your vision for the future, and we want you to basically be ready for part 2, which will be coming out next week, where we start talking about the various streetscape elements. So want to thank you for your time. Once again, I want to point out that this video was intended to be a reference for you more than anything to get you to start thinking about the existing conditions. So I want to encourage you to go to the other video that actually has the drive-throughs of each corridor. Feel free to pause it, use the scroll bar that you see on the bottom of the screen to fast forward, pause, stop, whatever the case might be, and to really start thinking about those streetscape elements in a way that you probably weren't able to do so before when you were driving. Once again, thank you for your time, and look forward to working with you all in the future.